Hi, hello everybody, wherever you may be today. My name is Frank Leone, and this is episode number 5 of the 77 Group's YouTube channel. And this is my week. I do the odd weeks, and Mitch does the even weeks. And the title of today's presentation is Negotiation, a Special Form of Communication.
Right, you are, Frank. And as we roll into and grow in our whole YouTube sphere experience, want to just point out that as we go through each week, each episode of on our YouTube channel mirrors closely to one chapter in each of our books. So, for instance, today's chapter, Frank will be talking about communication and negotiations from chapter 17 of his recently released book, 77 Ways to Perfect Your Communication Skills, Enhancing Your Personal and Professional Relationships. And as we do this each week, we'll be posting these every Sunday. So, and they cobble very nicely, the YouTube content along with the book. And if you've got both together, then you're getting the full effect of what we can bring to you today. Of course, next week, we'll be talking about leadership. My book, The 77 Principles, Tips, and Takeaways for Exceptional Leaders. That will be out in a few months, probably late summer. And you got that coming up. And also remember, each week, we will be giving an award to the question of the week, as judged by Frank and I. And the winner will get a free complimentary 15 minutes one-on-one with the subject matter expert. So for instance, this week's question award winner gets a free 15 minutes to pick Frank's brain and walk away smarter. And so we ask you to engage us, interact with us, leave your questions, tell us where you're from, and also to subscribe and like us. Make sure that when you subscribe, you'll get our content in your box every single week, which we launch every Sunday of the week. Now, here's Frank to tell us more about today's topic.
It's a little historical perspective. Those of you that have been kind enough to watch any or all of the preceding 4 episodes know that we were comfortably ensconced in the Granada Hotel in San Luis Obispo for those episodes. And now we're in the middle of the shelter-in-place era. So you'll notice that instead of sitting together, thanks to the wonderful world of Zoom, we were able to bring our thoughts to you via this method as well. The last series were recorded coincidentally on March the 11th. And when we were done, I went up to my room. I was staying at the Granada Hotel, and sure enough, turned on the television set, and that was the day that they canceled the NBA season and Major League Spring Training. It was pretty obvious that a new era had begun that very day.
Yep, it all came crashing down.
And here we have been ever since. So just wanted to put that in perspective, and we'll be here on Zoom for as long as it takes to get our information across to you. In any event, so the topic today is one that I really love, and it is negotiation, a special form of communication. And if you go to our website, www.77grp.com, there is a sample chapter on the website, and it turns out that the sample chapter is chapter 17, which is the very chapter that I'll be discussing today. So although I encourage everybody to get the book if you don't already have it, you can go on the website and read the chapter for this particular topic free of charge. So please do consider doing that. And point of overview, when we are talking about negotiation, at first blush, it may seem like we're talking about something that people do rarely. That, okay, well, I may have to negotiate a price for a new house in a couple of years, or I may be buying a new car sometime soon, but I really don't need to brush up my negotiation skills because they are an essential part of my life. I would argue that it's very different than that. That each and every day, virtually all of us, unless you're a hermit living alone in a cabin in rural Montana, are a negotiation with somebody about something at some time. And that negotiation, rather than an episodic every now and then occurrence, is something that's very central to everything that we do every day and very central to the communication skills that we need to bring to the table. So I cannot emphasize enough the critical importance of today's topics. So as we do every week, I want to run through 5 tips. There's more information in the book, but I want to give 5 key tips with the thought that being that even a couple of these are of value to you, it's probably been worth your while to spend the 20 or 25 minutes or so, joining us in this session. So in any event, the first tip when it comes to negotiation, a special form of communication, is start with sincere praise. Establish a strong environment for negotiation. And when I think about this, I think back to a sort of a life changer that occurred to me back in the summer between my freshman and sophomore years of college. And that summer, I was home back in on Long Island in New York, and was reading Dale Carnegie's iconic book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And although it seems a little bit hokey every now and then, it is filled with some incredible wisdom. Even to this day, I think highly of what I learned in that book. And I remember that one of the things was, show sincere praise every time you have the opportunity in dealing with other people. So I adapted that. And I found that for a while, it was awkward, that I was being insincere or artificial or straining to find something. But what I also found is that by practicing that for weeks or months, no more than that, it became ingrained in me. And now I just automatically look for the good in other people. And I think I've really come to realize that the best way to create a positive interaction with others is to offer them, and I emphasize the word, sincere praise when you see something good in that other person. So it's something that should be part of all that we do. It's a win-win. We talk about the phrase win-win. We'll talk about it later in this presentation. It's a win-win. It's a win for, who doesn't like hearing something nice about them? So it's good for the other party. But on the other hand, what pleasure I get for bringing this to the attention of the other party and seeing how it makes them feel good. But even beyond that, it establishes a very positive environment for everything that you're going to discuss with that person going forward. And certainly when it's an issue of negotiation, operating in a positive environment is absolutely critical. You don't want to poison the environment by starting off sternly and saying, we have to come to an agreement on something or else. You want to start off the discussion by saying, something I've really noticed and that I admire greatly is, and oh, by the way, let's discuss a way that we might be able to get something done together. So that's my first tip. And again, the first tip is start with sincere praise and establish a strong environment from the outset.
So Frank, great advice. And it sounds like, establishing that footing, that platform of good rapport, so you get off to a good start as you go down the road of negotiation. But let's just say you're struggling and finding something positive to say about the person that you're getting ready to negotiate with. What, other than, trying to find something like, hey, nice shoes or whatever, what is there some other method you might use to get over that hump so you can establish that beachhead for good conversation and negotiation?
Yeah, a couple thoughts. The first one is, if you can't find something good and positive to say about the other person, then the problem is probably yours and not the other person's. That there's an awful lot. Mankind, in my humble opinion, is inherently good. Most people, there's good in their hearts, and there's good that they have about them. So that's the first thing, is that avoid the trap of, my gosh, what if half the people I negotiate with or deal with have nothing positive about them? I don't think that's true. And then I think the other thing is, the more you practice it, the easier it is to get there. Back in the summer of 1963, when I read the Dale Carnegie chapter for the next 6 months, it was not that easy for me. But ever since it has been, because I know from sheer practice how to zero in on other people, how to automatically have my antenna up so I look for the good in other people and immediately translate that into something positive.
Okay.
Okay?
And it sounds like something that until you get to that point, to practice ahead of time or to try to establish ahead of time before you even enter the room.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be just negotiation. It can be anybody in your life.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure everybody watching this has people in their lives. It could be a partner, a spouse, a significant other, an offspring, a parent, whatever it may be, that you're dealing with all the time, a best friend, a neighbor, a coworker, the list goes on. And it's really a good habit to always just be looking at that person and saying, you know, what do I like about the person? And for God's sakes, when there's something you like about a person, don't put it in a drawer and leave it aside.
Right.
My God, share it. It's a win-win. Why not?
Yep.
But again, the point is the more you do it, the more your antenna is tuned to automatically seeing the good in others.
Amen. Amen.
Okay?
Good advice.
Okay.
So,
So tip number 2 is start
yep.
with a position beyond your expectation, but don't overplay your hand. So the point here is basically always determine where you want your negotiation to go, and always start at a point that's a little bit beyond that or reasonably beyond that. So you have some leverage to come down, to compromise, and still get what you want. That's classic negotiation 101. I think most people know that. People don't necessarily apply it properly. The caveat here is to don't overplay your hand. And we see that all the time. We see that when people go into negotiation, they ask for something so obviously out of reason and beyond reason that it's clear that their whole goal is to set something where they're going to come down to a compromise that's in their favor anyway. And I don't think you want to do that. I think you want to show respect to the other party and maybe ask for a little bit more, but keep it within the bounds of decency and reasonableness.
Okay. So what other parameters might you suggest for someone to assess on whether or not they are walking in and preparing to overplay their hand?
So are you talking about being on the receiving end of somebody, or actually you're the person that is establishing where you would like to go?
Well, I started to the question as the person coming in and doing the overplaying, but I think you raise a good point there. How, as the receiver of that, how would you recognize that as the receiver? I'm going to shift gears a little bit based on what you just said there. If you and I were to sit down and start negotiations, and you were to come at me with something that was seemed a little, over the top, how might I assess that and respond to it?
Okay, so I'm going to put myself in your shoes, and I'm
Okay.
hearing something that's over the top. Go with the flow. I mean, just sort of grin and moan and know that if it's so far up there that if they're at a 10 and you want to get to a 5, it means they're probably at a 6. So sort of translate that 10, that extreme ask on their part, to something that's a little bit less than that, because that's really what their real ask is all about. So you're basically translating what they're saying to something that's in more realistic terms, number one. Number two, it doesn't give me a warm, fuzzy feeling about that person to begin with.
Right.
So that's a negative. I'd much rather see somebody that practices what I'm suggesting, and that's keeping things within appropriate limits.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. If they truly want to close any kind of an agreement or anything, and if they go to a 10 and you're only at a 5, you still don't have to say, "Yep, deal." There's still obviously plenty of room to negotiate. So what do you got for tip number 3, Frank?
Well, tip number 3 is to specifically define the win-win proposition. When you're negotiating, sometimes the most important thing of all is left out. And that is what's in it for the other party, what's in it for you, and why it's an appropriate deal, because everybody walks away with something positive. That's what a negotiation should be all about. But too many negotiations is simply, I want this, and you work toward it. That's not the way to establish a successful negotiation. what you want to do, sometimes even using the exact phrase win-win, that here's what would be best for me. I would like this, but in turn, I believe that you would receive this, and we would both ultimately come out ahead. So I consider this to be a win-win, and it's really what I think any transaction should be all about, that both parties walk away with something positive, or else why do the transaction?
Right, right. So at what point, and I think everybody that's in any kind of negotiation at least likes to think they're positioning themselves for a win-win, and if nothing else, trying to sell the opposing or the other party that, hey, this is good for both of us. How do you feel about oversharing too early as to what you want, or what your bottom line acceptable piece is, in order for it to be a win for you?
I think too early is one of those highly subjective terms. I think it varies greatly by the two individuals in question. I think it varies greatly by the importance of the negotiation. I think it varies greatly by the level of detail that's involved in the negotiation. So there's a lot of different variables here that play into this. And so it's very difficult to say, when you've jumped in too early or jumped in too late. By and large, I think it needs to be expressed earlier than one might expect, rather than later. It's not something that you conclude for your final knockout punch. It's something fairly on that you basically say, here's what I'd like to see happen. I think that if you got this and I got this, that we'd both be happy, and let's work toward that end. And then you can start to fill in some of the blanks. On the other hand, you don't want to say it the first word out of your mouth either. You want to establish a little bit of a buildup to get there.
Right. Yeah. And it sounds like with any interaction, any relationship, negotiating or not, when you come from a position of sincerity and honesty, you're always going to find some common ground or something as you move forward. So.
Took the words out of my mouth. A recurring theme throughout the book, and a recurring theme, I'm sure, throughout my 77 of these such presentations over the next few years, is that there's no substitute for honesty, sincerity, and just being a regular person, just being down to earth and looking people in the eye and talking openly and honestly. And, it's not about being slick. It's about being true.
Right. Yeah. And relatable. Yep.
And that's a good word. It's a good word.
Okay. Tip number 4. What do you got, Frank?
Negotiation is not a winner-take-all sport. Give a little. And the point being here is, and it's sort of gotten in the public discourse in recent years that everything is a win. You got to strive for a win. And, what in the world is a win? Does a win mean that you get all the marbles and the other person gets none? I would hope not. A win is that everybody comes out ahead. Mm-hmm. So, and at times that means that there's certain things that you wanted to begin with that you have to give up. But when you really take a hard look at it, it doesn't matter a whole lot. What's the difference? What's the difference? I'll give you an example. For many, many, many years, 31 to be exact, I was the president of Ryan Associates. We did consulting for healthcare organizations, 798 clients, including your organization.
Right.
We basically asked people for 50% of the consulting fee up front and 50% upon the delivery of the final deliverables. If somebody came back and said, no, we want to give 25% up front and the other 75% on the back end, that's okay. It's not going to really bother me. It's healthcare, it's hospitals, it's health systems. They're scrupulous people. They're going to pay. If that's important to them, I'll give a little. It'll make me look good. It'll buy me some chips for a little bit later in the negotiation. So always be prepared to give up something if it really, at the end of the day, doesn't matter.
Should you determine what it is you're willing to give before the negotiations start? What the threshold is?
Seldom, because you never know.
Okay.
It can work both ways. You can have some throwaways in there, but again, beware of looking too slick and too contrived. But you can have, okay, here are 5 things in the proposed contract, but that number 4 and number 5 I could live without. It'd be nice if I got them, but I could live without them. So that's okay, but you want to be careful not to overplay your hand. There's that phrase again. But by and large, knowing what you're going to give up is basically waiting for the other party to ask.
Right.
You're waiting for the ask, would you be willing to do this? And then you have to be fairly flexible. You can't go into it with the mindset is, if I say yes, then it's a little mini win for them and a mini loss for me. Not true at all. That
Right.
mini loss can lead to a mega win on the back end.
Sure, sure. And like you say, you've got chips you can play either during that negotiation process or maybe later in the relationship when we speak of life cycle value with clients and that kind of thing. If they like you, they're going to keep coming back and doing business.
Absolutely. Well said, Mitch. I agree. Totally. So tip number 5 is never, ever, ever, ever make the first offer. And I go back, in fact, I begin chapter 17 of the book, this little story, a little anecdote. Back in, I think the year was 2003, we had our national conference in Washington, D.C., and they used to run 2.5 days, Monday, Tuesday, half day, Wednesday. And in the middle of the night on late Tuesday, early Wednesday morning, there was a massive flood in that section of downtown Washington, and the hotel became big time flooded, and all the electricity went out. And trust me, it's not easy to conduct a conference with breakout sessions in multiple rooms when people are walking around in ankle deep water and there's no lights. And we had one speaker speaking in under a skylight. And another one was literally very, very well regarded, one of the great leaders of our field, Dr. Bill Newkirk, was speaking and was standing in water that purportedly was up to his ankles as he was speaking. He would have gotten electrocuted, except there was no electricity, so he was safe. But in any event, all of that said, I was astute enough in dealing with hotels to a couple of weeks later getting on the phone with the general manager of the hotel and saying, listen, we got to negotiate a little credit here. This was very harmful to my conference. It was a mess. So he said, well, how much did you have in mind off the final bill? And the final bill in those days was probably $65,000, $70,000. It was by and large, feeding all the hundreds of people there, a couple of lunches, a couple of breakfasts, and a reception or two. So right off the bat, I said, $10,000. That sounded like a lot of money. It took him 1 nanosecond to say, fine. And as soon as he said it, I said, oh man, Frank. So I got off the phone. I went into my dear colleague, Karen O'Hara's office, and I mean, tears were coming out of my eyes and said, Karen, I violated my number 1 rule of negotiation. What is wrong with me? And obviously the basic answer there is when he said, how much do you have in mind? What I should have said and what was I thinking was, what do you think is fair, Mr.
Right.
GM?
Yeah.
And if Mr. GM said 20,000, I would have said, well, I don't know, but well, that's okay. I want to have a long-term relationship with you. That's okay. But the point being that you never, ever, ever make the first offer because the other party may be thinking in terms more favorable to you than that offer is. And that's a basic rule. I'm sorry, Mitch, go ahead.
Right, and I think you illustrate it so well with that story. But what if you find yourself in a stalemate where the other party is thinking the same thing? I'm not making the first move here, and it's just a whole lot of nothing, no progress on either side going on.
Well, you both started laughing, and then I shot out, well, obviously you've read my book.
Right?
That's the problem is the more people read my book, I have less people that I can negotiate with.
That's it.
You know what? It really doesn't happen very often. I mean, for that one, incredible error that I made in Washington, D.C., 99 times I've done it properly, and I've been the first person. And sometimes they say, well, I don't know. And, you can hem and haw. You can say, well, ballpark wise, I need to have some sense. After a while, you just sort of get used to extending the conversation out without looking like you're, absolutely stuck in this negotiation mode as well. But still, you just don't do it. You just simply don't do it.
So, right. So don't don't be the first one to blink, basically. Just wait for the other party to play their hand, and then take it all in and respond accordingly, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it also varies a little bit by the importance of the negotiation. I mean, we're talking $10,000 or $20,000 out of my wallet in this case.
Right.
It may be a negotiation that's, you're dealing with your son and you want to, your young child, and you want to negotiate with them, how long they're going to be, it's been so long, I don't remember the phrase for it, but when you're not allowed out of the house. It's not lockdown.
Yeah.
There's some phrase for it. You're grounded. It's grounded.
Oh, there you go. Right. My mom used to say you're on restriction.
I mean, so there is variability here depending upon the importance of the negotiation and the amount that you're talking about.
Sure. That makes good sense. All right. Anything else to add to those 5 great tips this week, Frank?
Well, I could go on forever, but I'll turn it back to you, Mitch.
Okay, that's another chapter for another day. Okay. So next week, the topic, I'll be taking the lead next week as we transition into leadership. And the topic next week is focus on two-way interpersonal relationships. So make sure you tune in next week and we'll go over that. I'll do some how-tos, some insights, and some good tips next week as well. Also, please remember to subscribe and like us. If you like what you saw, boom, let us know. And remember to submit a question because there's a nice prize waiting for you for the best question that's submitted each week. And Frank, it's time for our closing thoughts. I'm not sure who goes first here, but I'll be happy to lead off if you like.
Go ahead.
And really, from the book of Golden Rules, my thought takes me back to something my mother always told me. And she said, always say please and thank you. I think that's one of the great rules. It always works. It's one of the most cost-effective and easiest ways for you to make yourself more likable.
Good point, and so true.
Amen.
As far as my closing comment, sort of hard for me to not say something about the current environment that we are all in. It's an extraordinarily unique time, and there's an awful lot of anxiety that's going on out there. And there's no telling where this may lead, but it could lead to some very increasingly tragic things. What I want to share is that out of the embers of such thing, historically and inevitably, comes a lot of good in the long term as well. And in my mind, I can't lose the thought that some good things are going to be coming out of this. I think they already are. I think that people are appreciating other people more. I think that we are becoming more sensitive to those less privileged than we are, which is extremely important. And I think in the long term, we are going to come to realize something that to me is totally fundamental, that is one world, one people, and that we're all in this together, and that life can be a wonderfully fruitful thing if we band together. So my basic message for the week is don't despair. Some very good things are going to come out of this as we fight our way through a very, very difficult and tragic time.
Well said, Frank. Thanks for that. Very salient and very spot on, as always. Thanks, Frank. All right. Well, that will conclude this week's installment.
Hey, Mitch, I want to point one thing that I forgot. May I?
Oh, please go right ahead.
The award winner for the best question of the week.
Okay.
And it comes from Unica. Unica actually engaged in a couple of follow-up questions as well. So 3 cheers to Unica. And Unica, if you're watching or at such point as you do watch this episode, just email me at frank@77grp.com and we'll engage regarding a time that we may speak on the phone. But Unica's question was, what is the best way to overcome the fear and anxiety that some experience while speaking in front of large groups? And I believe he or she, I think it's a she, went on, if you're he, Unica, my apologies. You are not alone. It's a thing I hear a lot from a lot of people that have been doing it for a long time. And All I have to say is, number one, practice makes perfect, or near perfect, and just the more you do it, the more that fear is going to subside. And secondly, I can't tell you the number of times people told me, boy, I got up there and I was so nervous, and I looked at them and said, you know what, you came across as great. What are you thinking? And I think that my basic answer is that it's you don't look nearly as bad as you fear that you do. So have confidence that if you're just you, that's usually enough to win over your audience.
Right. Yeah.
Back to you, Mitch.
Just great points, and congratulations, Unica. I saw those comments and questions come in, and that's the kind of stuff we're looking for, folks. Engage us. We're here to help. We're here to share. Between us, we've got almost a century worth of experience and expertise, which amazes me that we have that much. But at this point in our careers and our lives, we're looking to give it all away and share it with you folks. So thanks, Unica, for checking in with that. All right, well, that'll do it for today. This episode 5 of the 77 group. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stay engaged with us. For my partner and friend, Frank Leone, I'm Mitch Goddard, and this is the 77 group. Thanks for watching.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.